Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As ranking member of the Asia Pacific Subcommittee, I'm convinced that this century will be defined by how we respond to the Chinese Communist Party and its drive towards global hegemony. If we respond effectively, freedom and democracy will continue to prevail and flourish. If we fail, the People's Republic of China will replace the post-World War II order with a new global order that revolves around Beijing, and the world will be far worse off for it. Unfortunately, I cannot support this EAGLE Act in its current form today because the legislation fails to fully appreciate the gravity of the threat posed by the CCP and consequently does not rise to meet the challenge that we face. After decades of inaction, we need to reevaluate our basic approach towards engagement with the Chinese government. We need bold legislation that utilizes the full range of our national power to ensure that freedom will prevail in a strategic competition with the PRC that we did not start, we do not want, but which we must win. This legislation should have been far bolder and less wasteful than the bill the Senate passed a few weeks ago. Instead, the EAGLE Act moves us in the opposite direction, shedding several substantive provisions that the Senate adopted. What's left are bits of substance scattered in a sea of platitudes that's one part rhetoric, one part strategic reports, and one part, a large part, Green New Deal. Unfortunately, strategy reports are like bringing a knife to a gunfight, and this majority seems to believe that climate leadership is more important than meeting the much more urgent threat posed by the PRC. I think the best way to describe this legislation is that it's timid. It's as if the majority is either afraid to admit that the PRC poses a threat or not willing to commit the resources necessary to combat Chinese aggression. But the American people know that China does pose a threat to the U.S., and they have for quite a while. For those who lost their jobs to the PRC's unfair trade practices or currency manipulation or a cyber attack originating in China, the debate we are having today was settled a long time ago. Now is the time to meet the challenge head-on, not debate whether it even exists. To be fair, the substitute amendment makes several improvements upon the original bill, especially on Taiwan. And I want to thank the Chairman for working with a number of us to include some excellent Taiwan-related provisions in the bill. There are also items on Oceania, legislation on Xinjiang, that has already passed the House, and various other provisions that deserve to become law. On the whole, however, the bill fails on its principal objective to stand up to China. Now I'll use the balance of my time to frame the challenge we face from the Chinese Communist Party. For decades since Nixon went to China, the United States has attempted to play nice with the People's Republic of China in hopes that incorporating it into the post-World War II order would push the CCP to become responsible global stakeholders. It's now become clear that those hopes were at best overly optimistic. The communists in Beijing were never interested in joining our system. Instead, they've used our efforts at engagement against us, hiding their strength and biding their time, all while investing heavily in their military and developing strategic initiatives to remake the world in their image. On every front, Beijing is challenging the free world and our premise that open societies, free markets, and the rule of law always result in a prosperous and equitable civilization. This challenge is now obvious, whether we look at the PRC's fundamental disregard for human rights, their rampant theft of intellectual property, their manipulation of the international trading system, their penchant for secrecy and cover-ups which worsened the COVID-19 pandemic. In some people's minds, we aren't really in a struggle for global ideological supremacy with the CCP. One need look no further than Senator Bernie Sanders' article in Foreign Affairs a couple of weeks ago. Incredibly, he seems to argue that instead of competing with China, we should become more like them, adopting socialist policies across the board. Let me remind the committee that throughout the Cold War, there were those who said the Soviet Union really wasn't all that bad either. In fact, I think one of them was Bernie Sanders while he was honeymooning in Moscow. Well, Bernie was wrong then, and he's wrong again. It's past time that we adopt policies that will win the struggle between Beijing and the free world. This bill, unfortunately, does not do that, Mr. Chairman, which is why I cannot support it today, and I yield back.